very happy to introduce Keryn James. She is a sustainability veteran. She has worked within the field since long before sustainability became a buzzword. Keryn is the Group Chief Executive of ERM. It's the largest sustainability consultancy in the world with 5,000 plus staff, presence in 47 countries. She has worked across industries, across the world, and specializes in environment, health, and safety consultancy. Keryn, you have listened into the discussion, and we're curious to hear your views on next generation of business. Welcome.
Great, thank you so much. And it's really a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with all of you today and to share some perspectives. I feel very privileged to be one of the few non-Swedish, non-Finnish speakers. I'm actually Australian by birth, and I live in London, and as was mentioned, run a very global business. So I'm hoping to share some global perspectives with you today, and I hope that that is helpful for you and provides some insights. We are at a very crucial time, I think, both for society and for business more broadly. And I find myself reflecting on the fact that literally almost 1 year ago, we closed all of our offices around the world and had 5,000 people working from home instantly overnight. We were locating colleagues who were traveling for business all across the world, trying to make arrangements to get them home. We were making decisions to protect our business and trying to think about how we could help our clients respond to their changing needs, which also had changed overnight. And at the time, I don't think we really foresaw the scale of the social, economic, and health impacts from the pandemic, many of which are still with us today. And this is obviously in addition to the other very significant global risks that continue to build. We're facing a perfect storm of challenges, I think, in the form of the climate emergency, nature, which I think is in a state of crisis, and mounting social inequity. So what we do in the next 10 years, what we call the decade of action, it really matters, perhaps now more than ever. And I think we have a somewhat unique but rapidly closing window on opportunity for action. And I think it really is time to transform our businesses and our societies. And the decade ahead, I think, is quite critical. And frankly, every day counts. And I think that although many stakeholders have important roles to play, and a number of people have commented in the discussion we've had so far on the role of government and the role of policy. And I think that that is incredibly important part, but today I'm going to focus on business. And I agree very much with the theme and the topic of this session around the next generation of business. 25 years ago, ERM was one of the founding members of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, or the WBCSD. And today I'm one of 3 co-vice chairs of that organization. It's a 200-member organization striving to encourage business all around the world to take a leading role in addressing sustainability challenges and to be at the forefront of pushing forward what we're trying to do. Stora Enso and Annika are key members of the WBCSD, and Annika and I sit on the executive committee together. And I think that it is the view of the WBCSD, it is my personal view that business can and must play a leading role if we're going to achieve what we need to achieve by 2030. It's an opportunity for leadership, and I think it brings with it some significant commercial opportunity. So next week, the WBCSD will be releasing Vision 2050, which calls for a world in which 9 billion people can live well within planetary boundaries by mid-century. We were heavily involved in the development of Vision 2050 and shaping what is, I think, a very ambitious agenda. And I wanted to provide you with a bit of a sneak preview of some of the key elements of the Vision 2050 work, all of which highlight the need for business to evolve its approaches on how it deploys and measures the return on invested capital. the COVID-19 pandemic has brought important vulnerabilities to the surface, and I think also underscored just how fragile and interdependent many of our most vital systems are. And frankly, I think despite the enormous human and financial cost, the pandemic, I think, has also created an opportunity to drive and accelerate change at a completely different pace than perhaps what we might have previously imagined. And a number of people have already commented on this. So we need to build an ecosystem of action. I completely agree with Annika here around the collaboration piece, and really try and create what we believe should be unstoppable movement towards Vision 2050. But it needs a leadership that is at once shared, disruptive, but also accountable. And I think Frederick made the point about what leaders need to be different in order to be able to deliver that sort of shared action, the disruptive action, and the accountable action. So what's different? What's it going to take? What needs to change in order to really deliver on this? And I think the most significant shift that we need to see, and this is very much emphasized through Vision 2050, is the need for a mindset shift. And actually right at the beginning of today's session, Gunvor Kronman's introduction, she mentioned the need to kind of think differently. The Vision 2050 document calls for a radical shift in all parts of society, and with respect to business, radical shifts around how we think about capitalism and the reinvention of capitalism, building long-term resilience, and then finally taking a regenerative approach to sustainability. I just want to unpack all three of these things just briefly for you. So the first one is reinventing capitalism. And this is really about reimagining sort of the next generation of business, where product, service, business model innovations, really contribute to a flourishing society rather than, contribute problems in terms of emissions and so on. Where capital markets properly value inclusive, sustainable business practices and reward companies that create the greatest positive social and environmental impact. So we need to price in the externalities, rather than it being seen as too expensive to be sustainable. We need to think differently about how we reward people who are addressing those issues. And then finally, making sure that actually more capital is actually mobilized towards businesses, assets, and solutions that deliver on the SDGs, including the transition to a 1.5 degree world. And there's a really growing focus, I think, on the concept of stakeholder capitalism globally. And the moves that we're seeing towards embedding this in the financial standards and the disclosure requirements, I think are really going to drive this forward. So really rethinking how we think about capitalism and the role it has to play is the first key mindset shift. The second one is around the longer term and resilience. So recently, ERM's Sustainability Institute and the WBCSD collaborated on a report that really looked at long-term resilience, and it's important. And Annika mentioned this as well, which is the interdependence that we have with nature and with society. Businesses cannot survive unless they're thinking about the entire system, the entire value chain. And we need to just go beyond thinking about our immediate fence line, our immediate impacts, and thinking about the interactions, and recognize that unless we have a healthy system, it is impossible for our businesses to be healthy. And I think this goes hand in hand with new thinking about the return on invested capital. Short-term thinking about risks and returns meant that most of the world didn't anticipate the pandemic. And we really run the risk of doing the same thing with climate change if we continue to have a very short-term focus on how we deploy capital. And then finally, regeneration. This is, I think, one of the key aspects of where we're trying to go as the WBCSD. And what I see with a lot of my clients is the sort of thinking systematically about how we kind of operate such that we get a net positive outcome, not just a net neutral outcome or reducing emissions, but actually how we get something that builds back better rather than just builds back the status quo. And in the Vision 2050 document, which comes out next week, you will see there are some really sort of practical steps outlined in that in terms of what do we need to be thinking about in order to get to that regenerative mindset rather than just a status quo mindset or even just a neutral mindset. So finally, at ERM, and just talking a little bit about our own company, I think we think about the decade of action, and our mindset shift is very much focused on ensuring, first of all, that our business is going to be flourishing in 50 years' time. It's our 50th anniversary this year. We've been going for 50 years. And so for us, it's about how do we make sure we're still here and flourishing in the next 50 years. And we're a people business, we're a knowledge business. So for us, it's completely rethinking, what does the future of work look like? Balancing the flexibility and the digital agenda and the space for collaboration and innovation, setting way more ambitious targets around diversity and inclusion, and then making sure that we think about our purpose being the central motivation for attracting talent to the organization. We've recognized the importance of needing to be even more mindful about emissions reductions and net zero. We've always had a pretty leading approach on this, and we're signed up to the science-based targets for scopes 1, 2, and 3, but we're now thinking about what we call scope 4 emissions. How do we help drive down the emissions of our clients? We've chosen to have a really strong point of view on a range of topics, and that's not something that we used to do. We see that we need to contribute thought leadership on how we operationalize sustainability rather than just being in support of our clients. And then finally, our employee-led ERM Foundation, which we work hard on delivering change for some of our partner organizations around the world, which otherwise would not have access to resources and funds that would enable their communities to be more sustainable. And that's a critical part of how we contribute. So we see ourselves as a next generation business, and we want to take the 50 years of knowledge and history that we've built up so far and really help our clients and our ecosystem partners drive the action that we need by 2030. So I have to believe that there are more next generation businesses out there beyond the 200 that are members of the WBCSD, and I'm sure there are many of them in the Nordics. And I think we just need to work together to understand both the urgency of taking action in the next 10 years and the fact that we need to put in place practical steps this year, next year, the year after, if we are going to achieve the kinds of outcomes that actually our children would thank us for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Keryn. Very interesting. One question before going to break and via Stockholm. Keryn, what would you say about the leadership? Where does it thrive, the change and accountability in the leadership, which you very well described?
I think for me, the critical thing is that the leadership needs to be there at the board level, and the leadership needs to be there at the executive level. I think for many tens of years, sustainability has been something that has been the role of the chief sustainability officer, who often is not on the executive or who is not, and there's no representation at the board. So for me, the best businesses, the ones that are leading the most change, are the ones that have this as a board agenda, as a C-suite agenda, and it is the role of all of the C-suite members, the CEO, the CFO, but it is not something that is a separate a separate topic in a separate part of the organization. It's integrated into the business strategy, and it is very much a top priority for the board.